Hello everybody, hello and welcome back to Lockdown in Lockdown, part 13, and today is the 13th of April. I don't know, is that doubly bad luck? It seems so, because this chapter is called My Darkest Hour, so quite fitting really. I'm knackered. I'm filming this much later on in the day than I normally do, because it's been a hectic day. So I don't know how much sense I'm going to make. I will do my best. I was going to say something as well, and I've completely forgotten what it was. Oh yeah, I was just going to do a recap. Alex is inside Furnace Penitentiary. He's been there for a little while. He is starting to get an inkling of a plan of how to escape. He's found what he thinks is a pathway to an underground river inside one of the chipping halls, which is where they gouge out the rooms with the pickaxes. And he and Toby have just broken in to this chipping room. Donovan provided a distraction to find that their way out is this wide. They can't get through. And this great big hopeful moment that Alex had has just been shattered, basically. And his one chance of escape, he thinks, is pretty much over and done with. Which is why, it's called My Darkest Hour. Have you all got your tea ready? I hope so. Z practically had to drag me back through the rocky labyrinth of room 2. The sudden switch from thinking we were home free to knowing there was no way through the slit in the ground was unbearable. In the space of a second I had lost the will to carry on, and with it had fled the part of my brain that could remember how to do simple things like walk and talk. I must have bumped into a dozen rocks, scraping my shins and arms and even my face, but I didn't care. It was over. Several wrong turns later, and we found our way back into the tunnel. Z switched his lamp off, then mine, leading the way towards the wooden planks. Beyond them, the equipment room was empty, but we had no idea where the black suit was. He could have been right outside, waiting for us to emerge so he could pump us full of shot. The thought didn't bother me. At least it would be quicker than festering away in Furnace for the next 7 decades. I dived down onto the floor and pushed my way through the loose board, ignoring Z's frantic protests. "Wait, for God's sake," he hissed, but by the time he'd repeated himself, I was already out. The coast was clear. The guard, nowhere to be seen. Z pushed himself through, scrambling to his feet and grabbing our pickaxes from where we'd left them. "Let's get back." "What's the point?" I asked, not moving. Z grabbed my sleeve and hoisted me forwards, pulling me into room 3. With the heat and the noise, nobody even saw us enter. "Come on," he said, his words almost lost in the hammering. "Did you really expect it to be that easy?" We spotted Donovan hard at work and shuffled over. He took one look at our expressions and his shoulders slumped. "No river then," he said matter-of-factly. "It's there, but the gap is too narrow and the walls are too thick," Z explained when I didn't open my mouth. Donovan nodded, then returned to work, mumbling something like "too bad" over his shoulder. Z shrugged at me, then started hacking away at the wall. I lifted my pickaxe half-heartedly and took a swing, but I just couldn't find the energy to make it count. I mean, why bother? If a lifetime in this sweaty room was all I had to look forward to, was all any of us had to look forward to, why didn't I just ram the pick into my brain? I'm sorry to say that my thoughts were like that for the rest of the morning. A slideshow of ways to put myself out of my misery. Not that I think I ever would have gone through with it, but I'd been so set on an escape that was now impossible, and the only form of freedom left to me was death. It was a terrible kind of freedom, one from misery and pain, yes, but also one from lightness and laughter and life. It was an absence of everything. We walked from the chipping rooms with all the enthusiasm of death row prisoners going to the electric chair, showering and dressing without a word. Silence followed us as we grabbed our food in the canteen and sat down at an empty bench. We all made a good job of thoroughly poking our mush, but nobody seemed to be eating it. So, are you saying we need to just lose a little bit of weight before we fit in the crack? Asked Donovan after a few minutes, pushing his plate away and folding his arms. Because I think I can do that. Even a baby wouldn't be able to get through, Z replied, holding his hands a few centimetres apart to demonstrate the size of the gap. My cat wouldn't be able to squeeze its bony ass into that hole. As usual, lunch was interrupted by the sound of crashing plates and yelling. I peered over Z's shoulder to see the skulls going to work and some kids in the middle of the room. From here, it looked like the other new fish, Ashley and Toby. They were getting food poured down their overalls and rubbed in their faces, but I didn't even think about trying to help. After dreaming of escape, the reality of Furnace seemed even heavier, even more claustrophobic than before. The oppressive air pushed down on me like a weight. I felt like I couldn't move a muscle. And we couldn't chip it, Donovan went on. Even if we could all get in there, it would be too noisy, he answered. Besides, it would take us weeks to break through. Any of you guys know how to make a bomb? Donovan went on, smiling, but he got no response. How about the gas tanks in the kitchen? They'd blow a hole in anything if they were lit up. You've seen those things, Z countered. They're bolted and strapped and secured tighter than the gold in Fort Knox. There's no way you'd be able to get them loose, let alone smuggle them across the yard. Donovan wasn't willing to give up. Come on, you get me all excited about this, then you're telling me it's impossible. That's just cruel. Well, boo-hoo, I suddenly snapped. Poor you. You've been wasting away here for half a decade, Donovan. Why didn't you find your own way out? What do you want from me? He stared at me like he was going to lash out. Then his face fell and he got to his feet. Wait, Donovan, I said to his back as he walked away, but it was no use. The world was falling to pieces and I was crumbling right along with it. It was over the next few days that I started to understand how people survived knowing they'd never again be free. It was as simple as just switching off, forgetting that you were alive, that you'd ever existed outside of Furnace's red walls. You just made your way from place to place, did what they told you, ate and slept, but you stopped thinking of yourself as human. We were robots, automatons who had every appearance of humanity, but who were dead on the inside. By some twist of fate, it was Z and Donovan who did their best to keep the idea of freedom alive. Every time I saw them, they talked about ideas they'd had, trying to melt the rock with laundry detergent, trying to chip their way down to the river in room 3, greasing themselves up with canteen fat so they could squeeze through the gap. I just scoffed at their plans, the same way they had scoffed at mine, the idea of getting out now laughable to me. But there must have been a part of my mind that still dreamed of escaping, because the image of the river never truly left me. I'd find myself thinking about it while working, while my conscious mind was engaged with chipping or bleaching the laundry or cleaning the filth off the toilets. I'd suddenly noticed that I was trying out different scenarios in my head, testing escape plans without even knowing I was doing it. I tried to stop the images because they were so painful, like wishing for something you knew you could never have, but they just wouldn't go away. My body and my mind were confined here, but my soul or my imagination or whatever wouldn't rest until I was breathing surface air. A week passed since Z and I broke into room 2, a week where I barely said a word to anybody, barely even made eye contact. Donovan and Z started spending more time alone without me, giving me cautious glances whenever I approached. I didn't blame them. I was a shadow of my former self, and my dark eyes were haunted by something that scared my friends. As if my resignation were a plague that was spread to anyone close by. 2 weeks passed. Another visit by the Blood Watch, 5 more kids dragged into the vault, their veins pumped full of darkness and death. I didn't watch. I just lay awake in bed, half hoping that they wouldn't take me, half hoping that they would. Anything to break the monotony. None of them returned this time, and there was no further sign of the creature that had once been Monty. It would have gone on like that forever, an eternity of hopelessness and misery, but for one instant of madness, one beautiful, crazy moment in the canteen's kitchen. Donovan and I were on trough room duty, both of us working the processor and blending the trash to put in our meals. We hadn't said a single thing to one another for almost 2 days, and I wasn't planning to do anything to change that. Donovan, though, had other ideas. "You remember that day?" he asked, his voice so unfamiliar that it startled me. I didn't respond. I didn't even look up, but he went on anyway. "Monty's big brunch? Man, I wish he was still here. That was some tasty trough." I couldn't bear even thinking about it, so while he chattered, I crouched down to turn on the stove. I suddenly felt a hand on my shoulder, pulling me back up. "What the hell happened to you, Alex?" Donovan asked, gripping my overalls as if worried I'd make a run for it. "I thought you said you'd never let this place beat you. You were a breath of fresh air here, man. For a little while back there, I actually thought you were going to do it. Going to get out." I wrenched myself away so hard that Donovan's rubber glove came loose, sitting limply on my shoulder. Grabbing it, I threw it at him by way of response, getting down on my haunches again to switch on the gas. With a hiss, it started feeding through to the burners, and I hurried to get to the lighters, cracking my head on the counter as I stood up. "You just gave up," Donovan spat. He was furious. I could tell from the specks of spittle crowding in the corners of his mouth, like some gutless wonder, some chicken. He reached down onto the counter and picked up a handful of rancid white meat. "Yeah, this is what you are, Sawyer. Chicken. Processed. Dead." I ignored him, lifting the chained lighter to the burner and sparking it up. I heard a squelching sound and turned to see Donovan stuffing his glove full of the wet chicken flesh, his face twisted with some strange delirium. I was about to break my silence to ask him what he was doing when he pulled back his hand and launched the disgusting missile in my direction. At that distance, he couldn't miss, and the packed glove slapped me right on the cheek, trails of chicken fat dripping against my lips. I reeled backwards, wiping my face in disgust. "Jesus!" was about all I could splutter. The glove had fallen on the burner, and I picked it up to lob it back in Donovan's direction, feeling the meat inside soft and cold against my fingers. But something stopped me. A flash at the back of my mind that was bright enough to blow away the shadows of the last fortnight. I looked up at Donovan, feeling my skin prickle and tighten, feeling my blood fused once again with adrenaline. He recognised the expression straight away and grinned. "What?" he asked. "What brought you back?" "This," I replied, holding up the dripping glove. "You planning on battering your way out with a meat-filled rubber glove?" he said, raising an eyebrow. "Not quite." I picked up the lighter again and held it to the burner, watching the air around it explode as it ignited. Then I pictured the crack in the rock that led to the river, saw it packed full of rubber gloves, just like this one, only filled not with meat, but with gas. This tea mug is like as big as my head. Okay. Jumpers. "Oh my God," said Donovan when I whispered the idea in his ear. "That's genius! Why the hell didn't I think of that?" "You did," I answered, rummaging under the counter and picking up a box of rubber gloves. There were 100 pairs in each carton, more than enough for what we had in mind. If you hadn't splattered me with that meat missile, I never would have had the idea. Donovan scratched his head and looked at me apologetically. "Yeah, I'm sorry about that. I kind of just lost my head. Speaking of which, you've still got a little..." He pointed at my face, guiding me to a white worm of chicken tendon that had dried to my upper lip. I peeled it off and flicked it at him. "So how do we do this?" he asked, brushing the flesh from his overalls. "I mean, it's going to be hard to smuggle the gloves out. We go straight from here to the showers." "But we're not under guard here," I replied, pulling a glove from the box and blowing into it. It expanded like an udder, then deflated with a farting sound. I've never once seen the black suits watch to make sure we shower after being on trough duty. It's not the same as chipping, no sharp rocks or mining equipment to smuggle out. "Yeah, I guess they're not too worried about someone getting stabbed with a carrot," he replied. "Okay, so we smuggle the gas out and hide it in the cell. Then we take it with us for chipping." I nodded. "The only problem will be getting it into room 2, I said. "Every time we go in there, we're risking our lives, and they only have to catch us once to know what we're doing. And there's only so many times I can threaten to bring down the roof before the guards start getting suspicious." I swept my eyes around the room, checking to make sure nobody was watching. Then I puffed hard to blow out the burner flame. Wrapping the opening of the glove around the gas vent, I watched as it began to expand, the main body floating first before each of the 5 fingers stretched out like an unfolding hand. When it looked like it was ready to pop, I plucked it off and tied a knot around the base. Then I held it up triumphantly. "Alex," said Donovan, as he clamped his own glove around the gas vent, "I think I love you." I laughed, tucking the makeshift balloon into my overalls. For once I was grateful for the baggy prison uniforms. The glove made it look like I'd put on a bit of weight, but it wasn't too obvious. Donovan pulled his glove free and tried to tie a knot, but it was too full. With another rude noise, it spat gas into his face, half emptying before he managed to secure the opening. Coughing, he held up the bedraggled glove. "Not bad," I said, "but please don't kill yourself." "How many do we need, do you think?" he asked, tucking his first attempt down his overalls and wrapping a second glove around the vent. "Probably dozens," I answered, "but we can't take more than three or four each at a time without looking like the Michelin Man. We can't risk giving the game away." "4 at a time, you, me and Z. We can do this in a couple of weeks, if the hard labour shifts are right." "A month at most," I replied, trying to calculate it in my head. Donovan sighed loudly as he pulled the bloated glove free. "A month's a long time in fairness when you've got a secret like this," he said, doing a better job with his next knot. "You really think we can do it?" I pulled another glove over the burner and tried to think back through the last couple of weeks, my endless depression, the sense of utter futility. But the feelings had vanished, as if my mind had been waiting to bring down a shutter and seal them off for good. "Yeah," I replied, feeling like it was the first time I'd smiled in a lifetime. "I really think we can." We were so pumped up with hope that we almost forgot all about trough. By the time the lunch siren blasted, we'd only made a handful of pots of food and were forced to serve the hungry inmates with uncooked mush. From the sounds of it, there were a few violent complaints, but they were directed at the unlucky kids who were serving, not at us. We almost learned the hard way how dangerous our plan was. Once we'd stuffed our overalls with flammable gas, we lit the burner again and came very close to being blown to smithereens by a stray spark. Next time we knew to fill up the gloves at the end of hard labour, not the beginning. Walking out of the canteen and through the trough room was one of the most terrifying parts of the operation. I felt like the globes of gas pressed between my skin and my clothes were visible to even the most short-sighted person in furnace, and as we crossed the yard towards the staircase I started to panic, knowing that a guard or snitch was going to discover us at any moment. But Donovan steered me on with a firm hand on my back, and we made it to the cell without incident. I hid the gloves underneath the mattress at the base of my bed while Donovan kept watch. I wasn't too happy about the idea of going up in flames in the middle of the night, but we had no choice. It was either there or in the toilet system, and the thought of being blown up while taking a dump was infinitely worse. Once the miniature bombs were secure, we set off to find Z, bumping into him halfway along the 3rd level platform. He was red-faced and sweaty with a nasty-looking burn on his neck. "Oh, it's Gary," he hissed as an explanation. "Had laundry duty with him today. He wanted me to do his share while he napped on the clean bedding. I won't be saying no to him again. He's a psycho." "Well, we've got something that will cheer you up," I said. "It must be something big if it's pulled you out from that mother of all sulks," was his reply. I clipped him softly on the ear, then started walking, waiting until we were in the clear before we filled him in on the plan. He just about danced a jig on the spot, the excitement too much for him. "Holy Mother of Jesus," he said, clutching his hair in his hands. "You pair of crazy, wonderful nutters, the gloves, of course!" I clamped a hand over Z's mouth while Donovan held a finger to his lips. "Don't want the whole prison to know," he said. "Yeah, that's essential," I went on, leaning in and whispering to Z. "If this is going to work, then we can't tell a soul. It's got to be us three, nobody else. I trust you guys, no questions asked. But I wouldn't trust anyone else in here as far as I could throw them. One word to anyone and it's over. We'll end up in the hole or crapped out of the backside of some dog." "Word of honour, boss," said Donovan, holding out his hand, palm down. Z nodded and placed his hand on Donovan's. "Feels like the Three Musketeers," I said, adding mine to the pile. Z laughed. "All for one, and let's get the hell out of here," he said. I know it was just my imagination, but I could have sworn there was some sort of electrical pulse charging through our linked fingers. Maybe it had been so long since I'd gripped someone else's hand, so long since I'd felt that contact with anyone, but I sensed it. A force that united us right there and then, a bond of trust, of friendship, of hope. I guess that's why it came as such a huge surprise that out of the three of us, I was the one who broke the vow first. It was as we were heading down to the yard that I heard someone shouting, pointing to the platforms over our heads. I looked up into the shadows of the upper floors, scanning the cells and the walkways. At first, I couldn't work out what had caused so much consternation, but then I spotted them, 2 bodies clinging to the railings on the 8th level. "Jumpers," said Donovan. "I wouldn't watch this if I were you." There were 3 black suits in the yard, but none of them moved. They simply gazed up at the 2 boys as if watching a movie, their booming chuckles audible even from where I was standing. The inmates around us were similarly unconcerned, shouting and jeering as they ran from the place for the boys would hit if they let go of their perches. "Why isn't anyone doing anything to stop them?" I asked. "Like what?" said Donovan. "Put up a safety net. It's their choice. Just let them go." "No," I whispered. Then, without thinking about what I was doing, I bolted back up the stairs. I leaped up the first flight, 3 at a time, bounding around the corners so fast I nearly toppled over the side. I made it up the 2nd and 3rd flights in seconds. By the 6th level, I was gasping for breath, and I almost didn't make it up the 8th set of stairs, tripping on the last one and sprawling out across the landing. I pulled myself up, desperately gasping for breath. The lights were off up here, the cells unoccupied and shut tight. But by the weak glow that rose up from the yard, I saw the 2 pale figures 20 or so metres down the platform. They were standing on the other side of the railing, only their trembling fingers stopping them from spilling into the void. Both boys were eyeing me nervously, and I could finally see who they were. It was the new kids, Toby and Ashley. I stepped slowly towards them, hands up to show I didn't mean any harm. Ashley shuffled on the ledge, looking ready to leap at any time. Toby was a little more secure, his eyes locked on mine, pleading for me to help. Behind me I heard 2 more sets of footsteps and knew that Donovan and Z had my back. "Toby, right?" I said. "And Ashley?" The first boy nodded, the larger of the 2 marking out his landing site 8 stories below. I stopped walking when I was an arm's length away and realised I had no idea what to say. "Don't jump," was the first thing that came out of my mouth. What a great help that was. I should have been a Samaritan. I know it's bad down there, but you don't have to do this. There's people who'll look after you. You can get by. I reached out towards Toby, but quickly pulled back when Ashley started screaming at me. "We can't get by. Every day it's the same. Every day we're pushed and punched and spat on. Some guys even... They wet my bed the other day." I laughed, which only seemed to incense him further. No, I said hurriedly. "It happened to me too. Not long after I got here. It probably happens to everyone." "I didn't even kill him," the boy screeched. "I shouldn't be here." He leaned backwards, his arms straining with his own weight. Donovan and Z rushed to my side, ready to grab for the boys if they jumped. "Come on, Toby," said Ashley. "Let's do it." "Wait, Toby," I said, turning my attention to the smaller boy. He was young, maybe 11. He looked nothing like the Toby I'd known, but when I stared into his sad eyes, I saw the same boy, the friend I'd let down, whose death I'd caused. He looked like he was going to jump, and I didn't blame him. I'd been thinking the very same thing until this morning. I thought about our plan, our way out. I thought about our promise to keep it secret. I thought about my friend Toby lying dead on a stranger's floor. I thought about this kid, the way he'd soon be lying in a pool of his own blood as well. I couldn't let it happen again, not when I had the chance to save him. "Look, there's a way out," I said as quietly as possible. I felt a hand grip my arm and turned to see Donovan staring at me, the tendons in his neck strained with anxiety. "Don't," he said. "We made a deal. One word, remember? That's all it could take." "There's a bunch of us," I went on, ignoring him. "We know how to escape." Both boys jerked their heads in my direction. "Really?" said Toby. It was the first time I'd heard his voice, a musical lilt with an accent I couldn't place. "A way out of Furnace." "It's a lie," spat Ashley. "He'll lure us down and then they'll kill us, turn us into one of those things. There's only one way out." I extended my hand again and nodded at Toby. He returned the nod and his dark eyes suddenly glowed. He started to climb back over, but Ashley loosened his grip from the railing and snatched his clothing. "I can't go on my own," he snarled. Then with a noise halfway between a snort and a sob, he fell. Toby lurched out over the yard, and I threw myself towards him, grabbing his outstretched hand an instant before he dropped. The weight of both boys pulled me onto the railings, but I held on tight, refusing to let go. The pain in my arm was unbearable. Looking down, I saw Toby holding onto my hand with everything he had. Clinging to his waist was Ashley, wailing and tugging on his captive to try and pull them both loose. Far below, several hundred inmates were watching from the yard, cheering for us all to drop. I screamed to Donovan and Z to help, but they didn't move. "Just let them go," Donovan whispered. "They know about the plan. They could ruin everything." I screamed with the pain. Z took a step towards me, but Donovan stopped him. "I'm telling you, Alex, let them go. We don't know anything about these guys." "You can trust him," I said through gritted teeth. "I'll lay my life on it. You can trust Toby. Now help me." "You'll lay all our lives on this," Donovan said. Then both boys ran forward, Z grabbing me and Donovan gripping Toby's arm. We all pulled together and managed to shift him up a fraction, but Ashley was still throwing himself around. If we couldn't dislodge him, then we were all going over. "Have you got him?" I asked. Z threw his arms over the railing and grabbed Toby's wrist. I let go of the boy and ducked behind Donovan so I had a better view of Ashley. "Let go," I said, but he showed no sign of hearing me. I said, "Let go." Ashley just looked at me with unrestrained contempt, then doubled his efforts to pull Toby loose. "I can't die on my own," he screeched. "Quick," hissed Z. "I can't hold on much longer." "Last chance," I said, leaning over the railing, my fist bunched. Ashley spat at me, the gob arcing up and landing back on his own chin. He thrashed around, eyes wild, and I knew I had no choice. I lashed out, my fist connecting with his cheek. His head snapped back, his arm slipping. I punched him again, and this time he let go, seeming to fall in slow motion, as if his endless scream was a parachute. I staggered back from the balcony before he hit the yard, collapsing against the wall as Donovan and Z pulled Toby onto the walkway. We all sat in silence for a while, trying to understand what had just happened. Then Donovan threw me a cold look. "I hope you're happy," he said. But how could I be? In the space of 5 minutes, I'd broken the vow and put us all in danger. Worst of all, I'd just become a killer. For real. I think that was one of the most difficult chapters to write. That was a horrible chapter. I'd forgotten how brutal it was. This is getting really dark. Okay. So, the next chapter is The Red Hand. And then after that, The Arena. 2 very violent chapters to come. So that's tomorrow. Back to work. Let's see what the chapter title is. Okay, so that'll be Wednesday. Okay, we should finish on Thursday. So it's Monday today. We've got about 3 more days of reading, and then we will find out what happens at the end of lockdown. And then, you know what? I'm actually going to start reading Solitary until someone tells me not to. So after that, we will see. I'm loving it. I hope you're loving it too. And hope you're all well. And I will see you tomorrow. Night, everyone. Night. It's like 4:30. It just feels like midnight. But night anyway. It'll be bedtime for some of you. See you soon. Bye.